And I was just wondering, when we talk about plastics, it's something that I don't remember having talked about, as you say, 10 or 20 years ago. It was just normal. Nowadays, I think it's safe to say it's almost like the most demonized material we can talk about. Cathy, do you think could that be the first step to kind of more awareness, more a solution-based kind of possibility that yes, we still have everything wrapped in plastic, but in a way we all know that it's not a good thing.
Right. I do agree that plastics are usually associated with a bad name, a bad rep. But on the other hand, we know that there are climate change deniers out there, but I feel that there are fewer plastic pollution deniers because you see the real impacts that are affecting communities. You see the plastic bottles that are washing up on beaches. So it's very, very hard to ignore evidence that's right in front of your eyes. So I'm kind of hopeful for the fact that it's harder to kind of turn away from that problem. And I also wanted to kind of talk about some of the solutions that young people are coming up with around the world to address this issue. And this is all very regionally focused because every cultural context requires a culturally specific strategy to make a real impact. So, global shapers around the world have taken it upon themselves to implement some projects to both conserve our natural environment, reduce the use of plastic, and also transform plastics into value-added products. So, one example is from one of the Global Shaper Hub in Lima, Peru. They led an ocean cleanup movement that featured 10,000 youth volunteers. This movement is the largest beach cleanup movement in Peru. It was started by 2 global shapers and just expanded to 10,000 volunteers. And their initial objective was to basically shape policy and get the Congress to adopt a plastics ban. They achieved that objective because the government saw the amount of work that went into collecting data on the different types of plastics that were being found on the beaches. This kind of data actually fed into a lot of the congressional legislative debates in Peru. And it also kind of points to the importance of citizen science, being all of us able to kind of work together and kind of come up with the solutions and collect evidence to inform policy. And so going to Gloria's point earlier, she had mentioned that we need to kind of start locally before we can expand. This is an example of local, really grassroots, youth-driven movement that actually now has a lot of corporate partnerships because companies recognize that they need to get in this. It's not just a problem, it's an opportunity. And the youth that are backing this movement, that are leading this movement, have a lot of energy, a lot of willingness to make change. So, this is the right moment, it's the right place, and I just want to leave it at that, and I can come to other examples later on as well.
In our case,
yes, please.
In our case, there's actually no manual for an organization that tells you how are you making that change. So we had to learn a lot along the process. We started in Spain. We didn't ban the plastic. We also looked for the best alternatives in every moment. We gave it a very rigorous approach. We had guidelines like certifications like DIN in Germany, OK Compost in Belgium, and we were looking at every time either for a way of recycling, where there was a waste recycling system available, or for elements that were completely compostable or biodegradable in order to prepare. Because right now, in these 3 months, we're doing the rollout to other countries with a level of complexity like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica. And in that case, we said, right, there's no system of waste treatment there. So the only way we can do it to start really walking the path is to have that guarantee of biodegradability and compostability in order to then shift forward. But I feel that what differentiated the stress and the effort that we did is the rigorosity on the approach of looking to the alternatives. So when you mentioned before the collaborations, I think it would be very interesting if there would be a common ground on what materials are available, what kind of alternatives do really work, and what are the best usages for that.
Just quickly before we go to Heather and then Tom, how do you deal with it on a daily basis in your company, in your hotels, for example? Have you banned plastic bottles? Are you only using glass bottles? Is there some kind of a corporate strategy or corporate rules that you give out to all the hotels?
We were working for a whole year actually. We did an X-ray of what we were consuming when it comes to plastics, single-use plastics, right? And we had 3,600 items, different items of plastic internally in the organization. So we did the analysis on to which department they pertained, whether it was a kitchen, whether it was a room. And then in every case, we had some work groups and task forces in order to prepare for those changes. I'll give you an example. If we wanted to change all the mini doses of gels, shampoos that we have in the hotels, we don't have them anymore. They're multiple-use dosers made of recycled plastic. We had to train the ladies that were actually coming to clean the rooms to make that change in order for them to understand how to use the new products. Another example could be the coffee capsules. We changed those for compostable items. So we also had to explain how the client could come to a room and recycle that, and where it had to place that item, how it had to change it. And all that process, we really realized that speaking about the training and training our people was the most important part of it, because if our people didn't understand it, it would be very difficult then for our client to understand it.
So did you have to explain more to the staff than to the clients?
I think you have different stakeholders, so people that are of interest to you, that you know that they have to help you to push this process and this idea that you have. And for us, the most important one was the employees. We had to start with them. So we had to start with the 35,000 employees because they had to understand why you were doing it. One of the things that made me spark that idea is that one day I was walking towards one of our hotels in the Dominican Republic, and I know it wasn't badly intentioned, but I heard one of the waiters saying, "Oh, no, Iberostar is doing this to save costs. They're not serving anymore a plastic bottle individually." And I started smiling internally, but it made me spark and said, there's a lot of work to do in the training, because people, you cannot impose it, you have to convince them. So we've done a lot of conviction and a lot of training along this year that we've done it. And now we're intensely dedicated to the rollouts in the 19 countries, because we have a compromise now within the next year and a half to do it in the rest of the countries.
And when you talk about 3,600, I think it was products, is there a end goal where you say we want to go down to this or this number?
So interestingly enough, I think that without sounding arrogant, but we're doing our homework, right? So, but there's a last step that will come from the legislation. There's certain areas like the kitchens that I would love to go into one of the fridges of my hotels and not see a card completely rolled in film with the date and the date of consumption. But I cannot avoid that because legislation forces me to do that. So what we're doing parallel to the effort internally is we're also promoting for the different stakeholders, whether it be political speakers, economical interests in the different countries where we are, to shift, to make a shift in that aspect as well.
Thank you. Heather, sorry, I cut you short.
No, that's fine. I think it is important not to demonize plastic. It's an incredible material, a phenomenal invention, and we basically, it's transformed our lives, improved life expectancy, all sorts of wonderful things. We're targeting particular areas where we take this incredible product that lasts for hundreds or thousands of years, and it's the single-use side. So 40% of all plastic produced each year, it goes to make single-use plastic, and that's the initial target, I think, of change. And again, lots of different innovations happening on that. And it does come back. We've actually got a project happening in London. It's a sort of an experiment to look at how do you change a system. So it's obviously a developed country society where you can go to the tap and have perfectly clean water that comes out of it that's better regulated than water in plastic bottles. And we were like, how do we shift that system from one that's become, over a very short period of time, a plastic plastic disposable society? How might we shift that to a refill one? So in the same way, do your homework. We did the research. We looked at interviews right the way across the supply chain, from the producers to the consumers. And we identified 11 different barriers to change. And some of that is just people using a refillable bottle. They're worried about cleaning them. They leak. They're not very good. Men, we found, were less likely to carry a refillable bottle because they're less likely to have a bag with them. So there's all these things that we have to overcome if we're going to change the system. And another key one... Quite basic, simple behaviour. But also it was access to water. So again, a busy, big global city, and it's on the go. So people who are commuting, travelling, going to meetings, taking their kids to school, who don't necessarily bring the water with us. And with British culture, it turns out that people want to refill their bottles, but 80% were too embarrassed to go into a cafe or a shop and ask if they could be refilled. Right. So we're trying to break down that system, working with the Mayor of London. We've installed 17 water fountains already in public spaces, and there's 100 more going in. So that They've got to be clean, they've got to be looked after and maintained, and we've got to encourage people to use them. And we're also working with a scheme called Refill, where it's as simple as putting a sticker on a cafe or a shop or a hotel and saying, we're quite happy for you to come in and we'll fill your bottle for free.
So the famous British politeness can be part of the...
It's a very big barrier in our society, and that's something that we have to overcome. So it is understanding the local context and targeting how you make the biggest change. So whether it's training your staff, whether it's engaging youth, or whether it's breaking down some of those barriers that are going to allow that change to happen, then we can start to see really big transformations.
Tom, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I just want to echo the statement that that was said, is that, you know, we see as consumers the visible part of this, the bottles we touch, the bags we interact with. But what's really important to try to have a sense of is as well the entire supply chain to get that item to physically, you know, to you. You know, for example, apples may show up at a supermarket, you know, with no packaging, but they would have stepped through layers and layers and layers of plastics to be able to arrive at that supermarket and be consumed. It's just like the food service items, I think, that you were chatting about. And just to echo behavior a little bit, to build on the point. I think behavior is really, really important. You know, it was a scary study for me. We went to a train station in New York City and put out a beautifully labeled recycling bin. There could be no confusion. And right beside it, a really negatively labeled landfill bin, you know. And 50% of people who were walking by and had a recyclable bottle would put it in the wrong bin. 50%. It was absolutely shocking that even if the packaging is technically recyclable and there's practical options available, our apathy is so high. Now, it tended to be more men, so for the men in the audience, we have to work especially hard. Women were better. Kids were by far below 18 were absolutely the very best. So just, you know, it's important to self-reflect on that, especially if you're in our demographic here. But it was an interesting types of solutions. You know, you could solve this by incentivizing. Deposit laws are a good example of that, and that does help boost recycling. You could solve that by fining. I know, for example, here in Switzerland, there's fines if you do it incorrectly. That also helps. That's either through carrot or sticks. But you can also do it without concept of money. An interesting idea there, through a partnership with PepsiCo, we installed little computers in these bins that when you put your bottle in to the right one, it would trigger an infrared trigger, and it would give you back just a sound file basically saying thank you for recycling, or a joke or something like that. And it boosted compliance to 90% in the right direction just by having people smile. And then the best was little kids were running around trying to find the next bottle, even taking them out of the wrong bin to put it in to get that next, just auditory feedback. So I think we need to also think about how do we make this topic exciting, because I think as it loses that excitement, we gain apathy. And then no matter what infrastructure, laws, and capabilities are put in by all the stakeholders, if we, the people, don't act, then it's all for naught.
I promise you, Tom, we'll make this topic even more exciting now, because it gives me and I'm very glad you talked about young people and the kids, and that gives me the opportunity to kind of open up the discussion a bit. And a little warning, if your Swiss German is a bit rusty, so maybe you take up your headphones, because I want to introduce you to an initiative from Davos. Und das gibt mir wieder.
And that gives me a chance to switch into Swiss German. A great action, a great campaign. Yes, I'm sure there'll be applause later on, and it's well deserved, I can tell you. Plastic is an issue which has attracted a great deal of attention from young people in Davos. And so I think it's interesting for you who live in Davos to hear about it, but also for the others. There are 3 pupils from the secondary school. That's Marat, Ivan, and Marco are with us here today, and they are representatives of their class, a group of boys in Davos, or a group of kids, basically young people in Davos, who have decided to do something about the plastic issue. I'm going to put the question to you. I don't know if you've decided who is going to answer, who is allowed to, or who has to answer the question. Ivan is going to answer the question. Could you perhaps tell us briefly, for the benefit of the panelists, how did you come up with the idea? Well, last year at the WEF, we were part of the sales force, and we had a presentation by a professor from California, Professor Douglas, and we were absolutely horrified to see how much plastic just ends up in the ocean. So we decided, and our teachers at school also discussed the problem at school, plastic issue, and we decided we had to do something about this. We can't change the world, but we need to start somewhere. And plastic is probably the most problematic kind of waste at the moment, and we thought we'd like to try and do something about changing that and start in Davos. So you've taken an initiative, you've just been told where the idea came from, and Marco is going to tell us about the next step. They were determined to do something, they knew they had to do something, and what exactly did you do? What was your plan? How did you implement this idea? Well, we discussed our plan with our teacher, and we thought we could do something about encouraging recycling in Davos. Our teacher, Mr. Schlichting, got some information. He talked to someone who's been doing this for longer than we had. He talked to Mr. Bühler about it. We ordered bags, and all of us from the secondary school got a bag. We were given for free a recycling bag. They're made of bioplastics, these recycling bags. So it's plastic, yes, but it's bioplastics. And I said everyone got a bag. In Davos, as in many other places in Switzerland, PET bottles are collected. There's a collecting point for PET bottles, but not much else is done about collecting plastic waste. It goes into the regular household waste, apart from the bottles. So that brings us to the third step, and that's when you really got going. Now these bags can be bought for 6 francs in Davos in some shops, these special waste collection bags. It started in the autumn. It's a huge success, and this activity is ongoing. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit more about it. Perhaps Mara can tell us what's going to happen next. This is not a one-off initiative. How are you planning to see this developing further in the future? One of our ambitions, obviously, was for this to become a sustainable project, and we didn't want it to be just something that happened for a few weeks and then stopped. And that's an ambition we have achieved. We wanted more containers in Davos. We want to be able to process it here in Davos, because if the waste is transported away from Davos to be processed, that generates more carbon dioxide because of the trucks. So that is what we are now working on. Now, I think everyone can join in the applause, because I think this project deserves a round hand. This is really an example of an initiative which started on a small scale, and it even started at the WEF last year. And you've heard what's happened in the course of 1 year. It started on a small scale, and a lot has happened since then. I see hands going up, so I'm sure that there will be an opportunity for questions and answers with these young people, and I can go back into English.
We hear what these students have done. You know, start something from scratch. They didn't have any help. They wanted more information, and they wanted to take action. Is that, well, it's something very encouraging. I think we all agree on that. In your experience, is that something that's typical, that the action has to come from, I don't know, from the bottom, has to come, you know, very grassroots-like, has to come from the young? To all of you.
Look, I think that plastic has its place, obviously. It'll probably be with us till the end of the time, but I do think that we'll invent new things, particularly compostable things, for example, which are now already being invented, just a matter of scaling them up. It's got to be the right plastic, and Tom's in better shape than me to describe to you what I mean by the right plastic, because not all plastic is recyclable, or when it's mixed together, it breaks the process down of recycling. So it has to be the right kind of plastics and the right kind of uses. And most uses of plastic, in my mind, are unnecessary. It's useful in life, I think. If you think about the world, take it down to your household. If you think about what you've got in your house and have a look around, my wife and I do this all the time. It's amazing how much plastic you've got in your house. It's amazing how much stuff you've got in your house that you don't need. At the heart of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them, I'm sure you know about them. Sustainable Development Goal 14 is the ocean one, in which plastic is mentioned, plastic pollution. At the heart of the Sustainable Goals is SDG 12. That is about consumption and production. And we have to change our consumption and production patterns. And that's up to us as individuals as much as it's up to governments to do so. Because we're just consuming too much, producing too much. We're all becoming middle class, and when the whole world is middle class and has 2 or 3 cars each, I'm sorry, everything collapses. The planet cannot sustain that. So we have to change our consumption patterns, and plastics part of that.
But let me just ask you again for the awareness part. I mean, we've seen here it's young people. I know you have 3 granddaughters. I think do you think it's a generational thing as well, that young people get it more or are more aware?
When I was living in New York, I rang up my grandchildren and said, "No, you must not use that horrible cling wrap stuff. You know, it's vile that people wrap their food in that cling wrap stuff. It really is vile." And you shouldn't use plastic lunch boxes anymore. And they let me talk on as the grandfather. Eventually they said to me, "Pappy, at our school, nobody is allowed to bring plastic to school. The whole school is plastic free." You know, and this is just a little primary school in Auckland, New Zealand. And hopefully that's the way the rest of the world is going, that they get it. You know, they see that they can't have that sort of stuff in their future.
Heather, what do you think? Is it a generation thing?
Well, firstly, congratulations. That's an inspirational example. And I think a lesson for everybody in the room is if we're all sitting here this time next year, what will you have done? That compares with what a group of students did from coming to listen to a presentation. And it is all something that everybody can do something about. So it's starting small. It can start with an individual. So to my plastic water bottle example, everybody in the UK, and it's a very similar figure in Europe, adults use about 175 single-use plastic water bottles every year. So if you just do the maths in this room, if all of us used a refillable bottle from this point on, that's a huge difference. It's 1 billion bottles at the London level. So what I'm thinking, of course, is, okay, how from Davos, how about Cloisters? How about what's your community? What other schools can you reach out to? And in the UK, there's a similar initiative because the youth are inheriting a plastic world from our generation, and they are part of the solution, both from innovation and pressure. And so there's a charity I'm a trustee of called Surfers Against Sewage in the UK that has a plastic-free schools initiative that provides examples to get from one plastic use to get rid of it. So to your example, Gloria, of the documenting the case studies to make it easier for everybody else. So can you share your example to other schools in Switzerland to see how many schools could have signed up to do exactly what you're doing by this time next year?
Good idea.
First Tom and then Gloria, please. Yes.
So I'd like to make 2 independent points. One is to really echo what you were saying, which is not just waste, but every environmental issue, from species reduction, deforestation, climate change. I can't really think of any environmental issue that is not directly linked to only one thing, which is consumption. Mm-hmm. And consumption is growing because the population is growing, of course, but it's also growing per capita. If you compare someone alive today, one of us sitting in this room, to someone alive just 100 years ago, we consume 10 times more physical objects, 10 times more stuff than someone alive just 1 century ago. And so the absolute best thing you can do to save the environment without having to understand any of the details, because it can get very complex very quickly, is just stop purchasing. It's that easy, or purchase less. You can also share versus own. These are foundational solutions, and the easiest way to think about that is, do you derive your joy from the act of shopping? Or do you derive your joy from some other way, interacting with friends, experiencing nature, seeing, learning like you're here today? And I think we have too easily put our happiness into this act of purchase. And I'm just a hypocrite as much as all of us are, but that's the key thing to focus on. Now, the other somewhat independent point I'd like to make is, here's the simple guide to understand what plastics are good and what are not so good. It's all about value. That's the point. It's not about some magic of what can be recycled or not. What recyclers want are clear, rigid plastics. That's a very, very simple rule. You don't have to know what the plastic is. Just clear, rigid is really good. Then the lighter, the better, in the sense that color is a contaminant. It's just like when kids paint with paints, it all ends up as brown, and you can't ever unbrown the brown. So you want to keep the colors separate. So try to buy clear or white, rigid, and stay away from things that are complex. Those are some simple rules. And one last point, I know we've talked about biodegradable. Not everything is so clear. You know, biodegradable has a wonderful place in emerging markets where most waste is littered, and if it ends up in the aquatic system, it's better, or in the natural system is littered, better that it has a path to degrade faster than a non-degradable choice. But biodegradable plastics actually in developed markets are a very big problem. And a good example of this, not to go into too much detail, is we've worked with Tesco, a major retailer in the UK, who has outlawed biodegradable plastics from being sold in their stores starting this April. And the reason they have is because biodegradable plastics are a contaminant to the people who actually have to degrade them, composters. Composters want your banana peels, your coffee grounds, your leaves, while biodegradable plastic will actively degrade. There's no question. You couldn't grow a plant from it. It's effectively a dead material. And so in many countries, when Tesco looked into this in the UK, the composters are sorting out all that biodegradable plastic that's put into a green bin, destroying it, and then actively processing what they want. So the key punchline here is give the waste management industry what it wants versus projecting responsibility onto it to deal with our problems.
Mm-hmm. And we learn from that there is indeed not a silver bullet and one solution. Gloria, you have to...
So I'm a firm believer in the youth. So first, congratulations. There's always such a special energy in the youngsters and the way you're doing things. Professor Macaulay is a scientific advisor of ours in our project. So he's actually helping us a lot in constructing the way we do things. And the first thing he said, he's like, you have to tackle the children, you have to tackle the youngsters. So we did a lot of programs with the children that came with their families to our hotels in order for them to explain how you can recycle, what can you do. And I could not agree more with Tom. If you look at a biodegradable product, ask yourself the questions, what kind of product is it? Is it oxo-biodegradable? Is it made of a natural material? To give you an example, we use plastic bags that are made of potato starch. We have toothbrushes that are made out of corn, and shaving handles for the shavers that are made out of bamboo. But we are in conversations now with all the recycling companies like TerraCycle. There's another one in Mallorca called Thienemann that we collaborate a lot, because we are asking them that question. Is it worthwhile to look for that alternative? And what do you do with it? And I think those questions for you are key on what do you do in Davos, how do you recycle it, and continue expanding. Look for clusters and continue with that energy. Congratulations.
I'd love to speak more about initiatives that are going on more on a kind of an international level. Before giving it to you as well, you know, open up the panel as well for questions and comments. But Cathy, please, you asked for the word as well.
All right, thank you. Congratulations. You guys inspire me. You are the next generation of global shapers. You don't have to be in part of the official Global Shapers community to shape your societies. So really, really proud of you. And I want to echo Heather's point on, you know, the question of what next. You want to make the project sustainable, and you know, thinking about what can you do to scale up or expand or tackle other issues that are related to plastic pollution. And I wanted to give you something that's maybe food for thought for you. So a few shapers in the Mumbai hub in India launched a project called Bottle Bricks. Essentially, they collected over 6,000 plastic bottles, and they turned that into bricks. So plastic bottles turned into bricks, and those bricks then were transformed into buildings and furniture that people could use. So it's the idea of using plastic to turning plastic into useful products that people can generate value from. So they actually partner with 50 schools and over 1,500 students. And so I'm just thinking in relation to the project you did, there's an element of capacity building and training and spreading the word to your peers and also people in other generations. I think you guys play a big role in terms of being the messengers and the emissaries of this important cause. Don't give hope. Don't give up hope. It's difficult, definitely, to start up a project from scratch with no resources. You guys are already doing a great job. You guys, I think the benefit of our generation is that we're a little bit impatient and we want change to happen right away. But sometimes we'll also need to take a pause and think about what are the steps we need, who are the partners we need to kind of scale up and move forward with this initiative. And so I'm happy to continue the conversation with you later on as well.